Today we're going to talk about environmental issues in the UAE and how these issues have affected animals in the UAE. So, what are some of the major issues that challenges the UAE's environment? To tackle this, first we're going to talk about the UAE in the past and how oil was discovered in the UAE, which led to industrialization and modernization, which in turn would lead to pollution caused by newfound industries in the UAE. Particularly, we're going to talk about air pollution and plastics and how these pose environmental threats to the UAE, which in turn have an effect on the animals living in the UAE. Particularly, some of these animals end up getting harmed. And then we're going to see some of the solutions by the government to counter environmental issues and help out the animals and in turn the nation of the United Arab Emirates. So, brief history of the UAE. The Emirates was once a humble collection of states relying on low-tech jobs like fishing and pearl diving for livelihood. But then, the recent discovery of oil in the UAE allowed it to jumpstart its development into a modern nation through the petroleum industry. Along with that, the nation developed many of its other industries, leading to an increase in factories and industrial areas, as well as infrastructure in which many products are produced. This also made the nation very rich and prosperous the way it is now. Also very popular and a very bustling, lively nation. However, the rapid development of industries has inevitably led to environmental issues found in the air and in byproducts and products alike of these industries. First off, we're talking about air pollution. One of the most obvious problems caused by having many new modern industries is air pollution, mainly caused by burning fossil fuels. For example, in 1. Factories. As of 2016, over 6,300 factories operate in the UAE, exponentially more than the number of factories in the UAE in the 1970s. Thinking about it simply, more factories means more fossil fuels being burned. More fossil fuels being burned means more air pollution. Vehicles. This is a picture of Dubai back in 2014 and the traffic in it. In Dubai alone, there were 1.4 million cars in 2014, an 8.2 increase in cars can be observed annually at that point in time. And the number of cars in the nation, not just Dubai, is ever so increasing. So again, more cars means more fuel being used, which means more smoke being released into the atmosphere, and in turn more air pollution. Looking at it at a more detailed standpoint, air pollution. Air pollution from burning fossil fuels occurs when these fuels such as petroleum and natural gases are burned to release energy. The general reaction, which is a combustion reaction, and if you know basic chemistry, you can see that there's an oxygen molecule in the reactants and then carbon dioxide and water and the products, and you can guess from that it's a combustion reaction. Now getting back into it, the general reaction can be summarized as fossil fuel plus two molecules of oxygen gas, maybe more, maybe less depending on the fossil fuel, carbon dioxide, water, and energy. The thing is, you might have carbon dioxide as a bit of a problem in excess amounts, but it's really the byproducts such as sulfur dioxide or SO2, which contributes to acid rain in other parts of the world, that are harmful to the environment. But we don't have that much acid rain, let alone rain, in the United Arab Emirates. The main problem in the UAE is in terms of climate change and global warming, making the nation's already hot desert environment way hotter, especially in the summers. Plastics. Another new problem brought forth by the petroleum industry is the creation of plastics and the commercial products made from the material, plastic. Looking at this graphic, it takes 800 years for plastic to decompose. Now, the problem itself isn't necessarily plastic, but the fact that commercially available products like plastic bags and bottles take hundreds of years to decompose, and people often throw these products away carelessly after use into the desert or on the streets. And these plastics often drift or wash away into places where they harm the environment and its denizens, like mangroves or the desert. Now, looking at how these issues harm animals in the UAE, changes brought about by industrialization in the UAE threaten its wildlife, force some animals to adapt and change behavior. Looking at some of these animals, there's a direct and straightforward connection between the consequences brought about by air pollution and littering and their effects on animals living in the desert. Two examples we can look into are migratory birds, which aren't generally exclusive in the UAE or desert animals in themselves, but they are part of the UAE at some point in the year. And then there are camels and gazelles, grazing animals, which are directly harmed by some of the issues in the UAE. So earlier migration. The effects of climate change are not just in the UAE but globally. In the case of migratory birds, the Emirates is an ideal spot to take refuge in because of the abundant marine food sources and milder temperatures in the winter than in places that aren't as close to coastal areas, say for example the middle of Saudi Arabia. However, due to climate change and global warming, winters have been less cooler and are shorter in the region. And thinking about it critically, if winters are shorter and less cooler, then of course these animals won't want to stay for much longer. They'll need to migrate earlier to cooler places, and that is a change that in behavior that can be attributed simply to global warming. Consumption of plastics. Animals that graze near places where humans live, such as on UAE roads, may end up consuming litter thrown on the ground. These animals will not necessarily eat plastic by itself, but they may end up liking the smell of containers that once stored food, thus being tricked into eating these containers. Camels and gazelles often eat from these litter piles, believing that they are abundant food sources as opposed to looking for grass to graze on. Eating these plastics causes these animal stomachs to be clogged and prevent proper digestion, and often lead to complications leading to death. As a matter of fact, in 2013, 50% of camel deaths were due to plastic ingestion alone. So, the UAE has been taking preventive measures in order to tackle environmental issues. For example, Abu Dhabi's Environment Agency has an Envirospelathon held in schools annually in order to make sure that students are aware of how to take care of their environment. There's also the fairly new organization, Masdar, which focuses on alternative sources of energy other than fossil fuels as a means of powering the nation. And then simply put, there's also the imposing of fines on litterers and neglectful camel herders alike to prevent the unnecessary deaths of desert animals. And then finally, cleanup programs by volunteer organizations in order to clean up some of the mess made by some of the UAE citizens. So, that ends our presentation. I do hope you learned a thing or two about the environmental issues in the UAE and how we're tackling them and how we should tackle them. And hopefully This presentation has made you a more responsible and more environmentally aware citizen.